Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a very, very special occasion for me. As I go back, when I joined IFPRI in the middle of '76, and we had the task was to develop a program on trade and food security from scratch. We didn't have a secretary, we didn't have staff. But we have a great board of trustees, and Dale Hathaway was the director at the time. And so how to identify, the kind of issues in which IFPRI could really make a difference. And we had to be very selective, of course. We were two. And then, of course, we grew a bit. So we divided the program in three major areas, and I will focus on one. The one was on the question of incentives to agriculture from an economy-wide perspective. The second was a question of food security, focusing on short food supply management issues, which I won't talk today, but which did a lot of work. And the third was on international issues, international negotiations, etc. Now, given the year '76, there was strong pressure for us to react immediately to what could be done in the question of world markets, And so we developed a program and the evaluation of various initiatives on the wheat agreement, the food aid convention, etc., etc. But thinking in terms of a long-term, our intuition more than strong facts suggested that there was an area which was under-researched, particularly by the agricultural economic profession, which is a question of incentives for agriculture. To what extent was there a bias, a policy bias against agriculture? How could we define this bias? How could we measure, indicators to tell us, the extent of this bias? So, you see, at the time, the development strategies, since World War II in many developing countries, the domestic manufacturing sector, industry, was the darling of development, And so many low-income countries, the argument for industrial protection, for example, took for granted that agriculture was fairly unresponsive to incentives, so that the domestic economy wouldn't sacrifice much in terms of economic growth, you see. And then on top of this, there were explicit export taxes, which were easy to administrate. But in the late 70s, beginning of 80s, the research findings started to show that farmers were not as incentive as they were thought to. And I think the work of Ted Schultz was very influential in all this work, transforming traditional agriculture. But we thought that for IFPRI, the focus should not be only on agricultural policies. We should think in terms of the overall economy, because after all, resources move, labor, capital, entrepreneurs move from agriculture to the home goods, which is service sector is very large, to the industrial good sector, etc. So there is a question of relative incentives. And we thought that the emphasis for us should be in terms of the relative incentive, because we thought that the main impact of our policy on the nature of the bias was going to be on this question of relative incentives. So an important element was sort of trying to develop an analytical framework, identify researchable questions, develop the methodology to examine the nature of this bias from the perspective of relative incentives. At the time also, early 80s, there were important conceptual developments, in the macroeconomics in the open economy, and which brought to bear the question of the exchange rates, which was hardly discussed at the time, and which we thought intuitively that was probably the most important price in the economy. So we have to incorporate, you see, the incentives from a perspective of macroeconomic policies, exchange rate, industrial policies, industrial protection, and the sector-specific policies, you know. And so...
Alberto, thanks for your remarks. We'll come back to you. I'm being asked to keep time here.
Okay.
So,
and so the quick question was sort of to raise awareness and understanding of the nature and implications of the policy distortions and document the incentive questions. Was there a bias? Of course. After the research that was done, we showed that on average, for 19 countries, 20 years, you know, agriculture income was about 30% below what it would have been without the interventions at the time. So it must have had a tremendous effect on investment, private and public, on income of farmers and agricultural growth. Issues today, of course, have evolved. They are, the nature of the bias is different. I think there's still some. But there are new issues have emerged in the trade area, which I'm sure will be discussed.
We'll get to it.